I want to talk about what I think is genuinely the most serious threat facing the rule of law that has come from the Trump administration. And then I want to talk about the ones I'm less worked up about. I want to start with the serious ones, and that is, we talked about the order against Perkins Coie, a law firm here in Washington, D.C. They represent a lot of political clients. They do a lot of election law work. Mark Elias used to be a lawyer at that firm. He was by far the number one left-wing Democratic partisan litigator in election law cases. He's since left the firm. But they issued this order not only stripping them of security clearances, but barring people who've worked at Perkins Coie from working in the government, barring people who currently work at Perkins Coie from entering government buildings, federal buildings, it says, actually. That's important here because there's a question of whether, in fact, courthouses are federal buildings because they are owned and run by GSA. I wanted to read some of what Chad Mizell, the chief of staff at the Department of Justice, who argued at a hearing about this on Wednesday, what his defense was. Quote, and I should do a disclaimer here. I know Chad Mizell. I worked with Chad Mizell when I was at the Department of Justice. I find Chad and his wife, Kat Mizell, who's a judge currently in Florida, to be wonderful, smart, lovely people, for what that's worth. The President of the United States is authorized under the Constitution to find that there are certain individuals or certain companies that are not trustworthy with the nation's secrets. The order is entitled Addressing Risks from Perkins Coie. It opens with dishonest and dangerous activity of the law firm's Perkins Coie LLP. It invokes national security and the interest of the United States half a dozen times. I also will say, David, that I've talked to a number of my friends who are in the administration adjacent, sort of very smart lawyer types who have worked in executive branch jobs in the past or currently. How about that?
Yeah.
They think the Perkins Coie order has some merit to it. And it doesn't mean that I don't think I'm right about it in the sense that, I think the Perkins Coie is unconstitutional. I think it is wrong. I think it undermines the rule of law. But hearing sort of universally from these folks, including people whose moral compass I trust more than my own, frankly, they're arguing that Perkins Coie role during the Hillary Clinton campaign of sort of laundering the Steele dossier through privilege, because law firms, of course, have privilege with their clients. They weren't acting as lawyers. They were acting as political operatives. Then they took that document and tried to and succeeded in getting the FBI to start an investigation based on that document. There's the investigation actually started before the Steele dossier, but no question the Steele dossier it wasn't part of the predication, but it was part of the investigation. And that in terms of helping a foreign power, yada, yada, like having foreign policy implications, was a threat to national security. Now,
which foreign power were they helping?
I don't know. Don't worry about
it. Okay.
But this is what I often say to people. I still think I'm right, but you've made me less confident that I'm right, if that makes sense. You've lowered my confidence level. So here we are sitting here on Friday, and I'm really contemplating this. The Wall Street Journal board comes out against it, all of that. Williams and Connolly takes up the defense of Perkins Coie, and good on them, while the rest of Big Law is silent, David.
Yeah.
And not only silent, they're turning away paying matters, because they think it might be adverse to this administration, and they don't want to get on the wrong side. They don't want to be on the list.
Pathetic.
Then President Trump gives a speech at the Great Hall for the Department of Justice, something that is unusual but not unheard of presidents to do. You, listening, if you're old like David, or me in this case, will remember the DOJ Great Hall itself was a bit of controversy in the early aughts when John Ashcroft paid lots of money to buy drapery to cover the bare breasts of the 30-foot female statues that are in the Great Hall. What no one remembers is that it was for a sex trafficking press conference, and there was a real discussion of whether nipples were appropriate at such a press conference. But that was a huge controversy during the Bush administration, and like everyone was making fun of John Ashcroft for being a prude. Anyway, that's the Great Hall if you're looking for pictures. The boobs are still there. He gives the speech. He, at various points, has referenced that there could be up to 15 law firms on this list. And he talks about this one lawyer in particular at that DOJ speech, Mark Pomerantz, who was part of the Manhattan District Attorney, the Alvin Bragg team that prosecuted President Trump in a case that you and I thought was pretty BS, David.
Yeah.
And pretty politically motivated and not a lot of legal merit to it. Well, fast forward to 9 p.m. on Friday night, and there's a new law firm that has been targeted, Paul Weiss. Disclaimer from you and I both, David. We have done AO Live at Paul Weiss now for 3 years running to do our Supreme Court roundup with Cannon Shanmugam, who's the managing partner of Paul Weiss's DC office. So please keep that in mind. We have absolute biases toward Paul Weiss being a good law firm. It says, this is the order from the president. My administration has already taken action to address some of the significant risks and egregious conduct associated with law firms, and I have determined that similar action is necessary to end government sponsorship of harmful activity by an additional law firm, Paul Weiss. In 2021, Paul Weiss' partner and former leading prosecutor in the office of Special Counsel Robert Mueller brought a pro bono suit against individuals alleged to have participated in the events that occurred at or near the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021, on behalf of the District of Columbia Attorney General. In 2022, Paul Weiss hired unethical attorney Mark Pomerantz, who had previously left Paul Weiss to join the Manhattan District Attorney's Office solely to manufacture a prosecution against me, and who, according to his coworkers, unethically led witnesses in ways designed to implicate me. After being unable to convince even Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg that a fraud case was feasible, Pomerantz engaged in a media campaign to gin up support for this unwarranted prosecution. Additionally, Paul Weiss discriminates against its own employees on the basis of race and other categories prohibited by civil rights laws. Paul Weiss, along with nearly every other large influential or industry-leading law firm, makes decision around, quote, targets based on race and sex. My administration is committed to ending such unlawful discrimination perpetuated in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, et cetera, et cetera. And then it has the same thing. It's the security clearances. No one can come work in the government. You're not allowed in federal buildings, all of that stuff. For what it's worth, David, the Mark Pomerantz relationship with Paul Weiss is a little weird. He hasn't been a partner at Paul Weiss since 2012. He then converted to the title of counsel, which can mean it's of counsel is maybe the biggest range of any title at a law firm. It can mean you're actually very involved in the law firm. It can also mean that you're almost emeritus, that you sort of like maybe visit the office once a month.
Yeah.
He keeps that basically on and off through going to DOJ during the Biden administration. He does go to Alvin Bragg's office. He comes back for like a hot second, a few months, I guess, in 2022 with that of counsel title and leaves again. I don't actually know where he is now, but the point is he's not at Paul Weiss and neither is Mark Elias at Perkins Coie.
Yeah.
And the reason that I mentioned that whole Perkins Coie thing is because this so wildly undermines any argument that the Perkins Coie order actually was about national security.
Yeah, exactly.
When in fact, all of this is just about a lawyer did something to Trump that he didn't like when he was a private effing citizen.
Yeah.
It is the scariest thing that this administration has done by a mile to me, David. It shows that they are ticking through their retribution list. They're starting with law firms. That's fine. The silence from big law is incredible after this Paul Weiss order in particular, because there's more law firms on the list. You're already on the list, you idiots. So start standing up because it's going to be too late. And you know who's after the law firms? The individuals, because the first thing they want to do is prevent the individuals from being able to get law firms to represent them. That's the point, you idiots.
And look, on this, it's time. There are elements of the Trump administration that are blazingly incompetent. There's just no question about that. But I do think that people overestimate the Trump team's incompetence constantly. And they overestimate it in this very particular way that whatever look, I have written about Trump's incompetence. I have written a lot about like sort of the larger MAGA world's incompetence, but there's a big carve out to that. They're very politically shrewd. They know why they won. They know how they won. They know what wins for them. And here's one of the things that they have learned is that if you can pick the right target to begin with, then almost everything else that follows gets subsumed into the analysis of the first target. So, for example, when the administration went to cut USAID, there is a reason why they led with this bogus tens of millions of dollars in condoms to Gaza story, because they wanted to fix in people's mind that this is what USAID does. It just does a bunch of woke stuff, LGBT stuff, and that's what it is. In the meantime, they're gutting PEPFAR, and it hasn't really been fully, restored. They're gutting other things that are not condoms to Gaza, which was a bogus story, very bogus. But once they get something categorized, and I think going after Perkins Coie, Sarah, they're going after a law firm that for a lot of MAGA people who are deep into sort of the MAGA extended universe, they know and loathe that institution, loathe it. And so you're going after a hated target. And then when Paul Weiss gets pulled in, they're kind of just pulled into that whole thing as well. Even though, look, I agree with you. The Perkins Coie, that's wrong, bad, unconstitutional. Paul Weiss, wronger, badder, unconstitutionaler.
Exactly so.
Yes, exactly. But
and note, by the way,
pattern.
we've skimmed over the January 6th part of this, right? A lawyer at that law firm, pro bono, meaning they didn't get paid for it. So they, when you take on pro bono cases, that's how you sort of know what the lawyer actually believes, if you will. That's why we look to pro bono cases in law firms. Brought a pro bono lawsuit against individuals alleged to have participated in the events that occurred at or near the United States Capitol on January 6th on behalf of the District of Columbia Attorney General. It was the RICO case, David. Civil, corrupt organization, the thing you bring against mafia folks.
Yeah.
Why would that be a threat to national security? I don't even understand the theory behind that one.
No.
I don't know how you're going to stand up in court and argue what now the January 6th thing was not just pardonable because they were overly targeted and we need to move past it as a country. I actually am sympathetic to that argument for what it's worth, David. I wouldn't have done it. And I certainly wouldn't have done for the people who had been convicted of seditious conspiracy who had their sentences commuted. But look, there's always an argument that we turn the page. Whether this was a good example of it or not. But the idea that it's now an unalloyed good, and that in fact anyone who disagreed that it was good is going to have their law firm targeted for being a national security. I don't even understand the theory for that one.
There is no theory for that. I mean, this is his vengeance without question. And then add this. So you on Friday night, you have the Paul Weiss order. And then today you have this we're recording this on Monday. On Monday, you had this absolutely deranged post that Trump puts out basically saying the preemptive pardons to the January 6th members of the January 6th committee. So this is like Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, that those preemptive pardons were null and void. The pardons were why were they null and void? They're null and void because, as he says in his post, Joe Biden didn't have the mental capacity. He signed the pardons with an auto pen. So now it's absolutely crystal clear this guy wants to go after the people who investigated and prosecuted January 6th prosecutions. I mean, and who investigated him and played a role in his impeachment, who played a role in the Jack Smith indictments. He wants to go after them. And there's just no question about that. And
wants to make sure that certain law firms, and I think we're going to hear from more of them.
Yep.
I think he'll go through 15, maybe more. At that hearing with Chad Mizell defending this order, the judge asked, okay, Williams and Connolly is here representing Perkins Coie. By the way, law firms representing law firms. I know it's turtles all the way down.
Yeah.
But Williams and Connolly is, I think I don't exaggerate here, the most prestigious law firm in the country. They're a boutique by most definitions of that term because they only have the one office in DC. They don't accept lateral partners. You're either born into Williams Connolly or you're not. And like they are I don't know, SEAL Team 6 if you get arrested. They're like beyond SEAL Team 6. So Williams and Connolly is in there representing Perkins Coie, and the judge says to Chad Mizell, would you be able to use such an order against Williams and Connolly? Like, could you just put out that order next week? And he basically somewhere between doesn't answer the question and says, yeah, it's up to the president to decide what's a national security risk and what's not. And look, I think the Supreme Court does and should give enormous deference to presidents to define the national security of the United States. But they're not going to rubber stamp it's not even a fig leaf. There is no leaf here. It's just not defensible under national security grounds for the Paul Weiss order in particular, because it has nothing to do with the nation's security, unless you argue that anytime you criticize the president, it hurts our national security because foreign powers can see dissent and criticism. But that, of course, has no logical limit whatsoever. We can just get rid of the First Amendment under those grounds because then all dissent is punishable. So, yeah, David, I feel pretty strongly about this one.
Yeah, I feel really strongly about this one as well. And again, going back to this sort of politically shrewd analysis, this is the kind of thing that where you really do need the counter-majoritarian presence of the courts, because the American public, let's just face it, is not going to be out in the streets for Paul Weiss.
That's right. This is the Nazis marching in Skokie. I'm not defending the Nazis. I'm not defending their message. But you're damn right I'm going to be out there marching for their right to do this, because that's how I know I have my right to do it. And is anything more clear than, in this case, you defend Perkins Coie because I'm literally on the retribution list also.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I was thinking about you over the weekend, Sarah, because the Paul Weiss thing, the Perkins Coie, like you said, there are smart people that text you or send you messages that if you really squint and you look at it sideways through a mirror in a prism or whatever, you can see that there was something that Perkins Coie did that might have been outside the norms of law firm representation. Is there something to be done about that? Maybe. Not this order. But with Paul Weiss, there's no way to look at this other than this really direct, extremely blunt. And then you add this to the Trump pardon, quote unquote, revocation. And I was thinking about this over the weekend. You know, if you're on that Kash Patel list, there is no way that you should be sitting there going, oh, that was all just rhetoric and puffery.
But you know what, David? A few notes. One of the thoughts on this was like, someone else can do it. You know, like, we don't need to be out there defending Perkins Coie. Someone else, like Williams and Connolly, can do this. They're incredibly able. So, like, let them do it. And first of all, and we don't need to get into my entire history, some of which is, like, pretty, not something I share on the podcast. But, like, my life has been a little bit defined by not letting other people do it. Like, instead of asking why me, I guess, have always asked why not me. Like, I'm in a really good position to stand up on this. And this was my op-ed in the New York Times, right? Like, I will get great legal services from people who are willing to defend me. And I know good lawyers, and I have the money to defend myself, and I have the public ability to get noticed if I'm targeted. Like, all of those things make me the person who should be standing up for Perkins Coie, who Sarah, I loathe, by the way. I've been on the other side of Perkins Coie so many freaking times. Like, I don't like these people. And I'll name some other law firms I don't like. Have I told you about Arnold and Porter, who I'm 100% sure is on this list, by the way? Arnold and Porter, when I was interviewing for them as a 2L, they took me for the interview for the purpose of berating me for being a member of the Federalist Society and asked me how I could possibly interview at their law firm when I belong to a racist, sexist organization. And I was like, why are you wasting my time and yours? I find this to be really unproductive that you think as a partner at this law firm that it's worth berating a 23-year-old? Like, what's wrong with you? And I walked out. So anyway, that's all to say. And I will be defending Arnold and Porter when they're almost certainly next on this list. Latham and Watkins is going to be on this list. I mean, we can go through the major law firms that I think are in this 15